Hello and welcome to another episode of the N64 Beta Project. As always, this is the show where we take a look at unreleased games, prototypes and tech demos for the Nintendo 64. For those who've been here for years now, I also hope you've enjoyed the nostalgic nod with the classic intro being used today after many years away. Escape or Die Trying, often simply known as O.D.T, was a 1998 release for both Windows and the PlayStation 1. The Nintendo 64 release was also due for release shortly after these versions, but the reasons for its cancellation was never accurately confirmed, but two main reasons were given. Firstly, it was reported in magazines that the Psygnosis brand were in financial difficulties, and after the poor sales and reviews on PC and PS1, the release of the Nintendo 64 version of O.D.T was therefore cancelled. This was suggested as being due to the high cost of cart production when the minimum production order would have been hard to shift enough copies based on other platforms' historical sales being quite poor. The most believable reason, however, was that Sony smelt blood and acquired and incorporated Psygnosis into the group in 1999, and therefore these plans were likely started during 1998. The games Psygnosis were pushing out were often known as being some pretty decent PS1 titles, and so it made sense to just acquire the studio. What may surprise you the most, however, was that O.D.T on Nintendo 64 was 100% complete. The game was done, and in fact both NTSC and PAL ROMs of the game were dumped and leaked many years ago, and so for those of us who are keen N64 players, this will have been a game which you may have dabbled with in the past. But for those of you who are only just hearing about this now for the first time, is this a game worth going out of your way to load onto your EverDrives, boot up in your emulators, or get a repro cart of? The game's story is actually one of its great strengths. If you're a sci-fi fanboy, then this ticks all of the boxes which will get you excited to play the game. The story begins that you're in the midst of transporting the Green Pearl. It's a mysterious item which has the power to save a planet from an ongoing epidemic. Of course, whilst you're transporting this highly powerful item, your airship is attacked and you crash land on a mysterious planet. When you awaken, the Green Pearl is long gone and assumed missing, your ship is damaged, the environment is both hostile and mysterious, and the remaining crew members must explore a steampunk-style world in order to repair the ship, find gas, and pretty much escape or die trying. Fortunately, there's a whole host of characters to play through the game's 7 levels as. This sounds short, but the levels themselves are huge, and there's a fair balance between combat, platforming and puzzle solving. There's no full motion video here, but the game's storyline is told through static images, which do a fair old job of pushing the story along. But I will say at the start of the game it does quite feel like you've been dumped on top of a structure with no clue what to do. Now maybe that was intentional. Stripping the player back to a weak starter character with limited supplies and essentially leaving you to explore and try and work out what the hell's going on very much is in the Myst style. Or it could just simply be a case of bad game design, and I do suspect that much of the world lore would have been included in the game's manual, which obviously we don't have for the Nintendo 64. You start off with 4 characters to choose from, but new additions are unlocked as you complete the game. What I enjoyed most about the characters was that their strengths and weaknesses harken back to classic RPGs, and by having various stats for your character, which are upgradable as the game progresses, you have your standard all-rounder, your tank character, your skilled but weak character, and your wizard type character. This does actually have a nice impact on how you play the game and how you will address combat. You'll find weapons and spells as you progress, and the impact of these will vary dependent on your character's stats for those elements. Other attributes include armor, character spirit, weapon mastery, and how quickly you develop experience. If you're playing the game for the first time, then the Archbishop is probably the go-to character because of solar energy, which is overpowered as hell, and he's perhaps the coolest looking character too. Now don't let the RPG elements make you think that this game will be lacking in action, however, because the third person viewpoint makes this very much an action platformer. I read many reviews of the time which seem to suggest that this was a sci-fi Tomb Raider clone, which is a way off the mark in my opinion, but that's perhaps because of the sluggish controls, which are very much in the era of the original Tomb Raider. The controls are clunky, and there's no way around it. Being clearly a port of the PS1 build of the game, it has a distinctly rugged movement feel to it. Now the PS1 version of the game supported analog controls, but the Nintendo 64 version feels very much like the analog stick is taking digital D-pad inputs and converting them. So what should be fluid movement often feels like completely unresponsive and dated controls, even for the time of the game's release. I do urge you though to persevere. If you can get past the controls, which do take some getting used to, the overall atmosphere of the game is by far its greatest strength. The ambience of the game is very unique, and the blend between the futuristic elements and those which are more primordial creates a setting which is truly something. In fact, one of the game's apparent influences was the classic Amiga title Chaos Engine, which is one of my all-time favourite games. I can definitely see that in the game's aesthetic, and it sounds a bit cliche, but this game is very much in the Jules Verne styling from an aesthetic perspective. This comes with a little bit of a caveat however. The draw distance is absolutely criminal in the game. You can often only see a short distance in front of your character, and instead of the usual N64 fog of doom, you have the PlayStation 1's darkness of destruction to look at. Given much of the game takes place inside the structure you've landed on, it's a shame not to be able to fully realise the studio's vision for what are often large rooms and areas. It also makes navigating the game an absolute chore, as sometimes you'll spend a great deal of time running around certain areas trying to find a specific point where you know you need to go, you just can't see it on screen. This, combined with the fact that the levels themselves are huge, can make this an incredibly disorienting game to play, and this was one of the biggest criticisms that reviewers back in the day, in the late 90s, had with the game. Now look, don't attack me for this, but I don't think it's half as bad as reviewers make it out to be. Chances are if you're playing this game, then you're keen to have one of those mysterious adventure type experiences, and so sometimes just exploring the levels themselves, looking to salvage ammo and pick up new items is actually part of the fun. In addition, the 7 levels themselves, although they're all interconnected, do have enough unique features to stand out from one another. Now the usual cliches such as the fire, water and earth levels or so on, they're just not staples here. But instead you get areas such as the kitchen, the garden, the temple and jails and so on. The names alone clearly let you know what type of level you're entering and have scenarios based around them. For the most part though, the platforming can often feel trial and error. In the same way with Tomb Raider 1, you'd often have to try a jump, often fall to your death and then realise that wasn't what you were supposed to do, the same is actually true here. However, when it clicks and it makes a lot of sense, and it makes future playthroughs of the game more enjoyable because you'll spend more time developing your new character than trying to figure out the route through the game. The puzzles too are often well thought out, but not always entirely obvious. Now I don't want to spoil any, but I will admit there are times where the game has an answer to a puzzle and it seems completely obvious based on what you've learnt from decades of gaming. You know, the situations where there's a missing item and you just assume that you need to find it, put it in place to unlock something. Well, forget all of that and everything you've ever learnt about solving puzzles in this type of game. Now it may just be the game trying to be overly unique for the sake of it, or it could just possibly be poor puzzle design, or maybe the studio just wanted to mess with you as the player. But just don't be surprised if you get stuck at maybe 2 or 3 key points in the game for an hour or so, scratching your head, not really having any clue why your puzzle solution just isn't working. A big love or hate element of the game though comes in its audio department. Look, you know me, I love ambient music, and so if you dig artists like Aphex Twin and Brian Eno, then you'll know that subtle score can be impactful if used in the right way. O.D.T is extremely sparse with its music, and the music that is in the game is subtle and not in place to draw your attention to it. The gentle beats of the music don't distract you, and I'd often go as far as to say that you'll pretty much forget it's there most of the time. If you pay attention though and listen carefully, you often hear short loops designed to add a sense of tension or urgency in the game. It is the effects, however, where the game really wants you to pay attention. The world is filled with ambient sound effects, from dripping noises to sounds of creatures moving and machinery in action. You don't always get to see the source of the noise, and when it's all combined together, it really does create an ambience in the game that makes you just want to hurry up and get out of whatever area you're in. It's extremely unsettling. So do I think that we missed out on a great title for the N64 here? Well, this is a mixed one. I actually think there was a great place for this type of game on Nintendo 64, and for my personal tastes, this ticks a lot of boxes. Sure, the combat is clunky, the platforming is unrefined, and some of the puzzles are quite honestly bizarre, but I can't help but love the atmosphere and the ideas that the game presented. The ability to grow your character as the game progresses, to mould them by stat upgrades and powers that reflect how you want to play is very cool. It gives me almost Gauntlet vibes, at the same time with a heavier emphasis on exploration. The world setting is often criticised here, but I actually really enjoyed it. The alien-like structures complete with maze-like elements have a distinct charm that won't appeal to everyone, but if your interest has been piqued by watching this, then it is a game that I think that you will enjoy and it is worth checking out. We didn't miss an all-time classic, but were we deprived with one of the more unique titles that would have been on the console? As always though, it's over to you. Have you played O.D.T, and if so, what are your thoughts on it? Do you feel that this was a case of a game with lots of cool ideas but poor execution? Or do you think that the Metacritic reviews putting this as basically a janky old game with few redeeming qualities is actually true? As always though, let me know your thoughts and feelings down below, and until next time.